Good, so I'm very pleased to be here and to be able to talk about the Heart Sutra in terms of myth, history and poetry. And I'll say a little bit more about that general focus as I move into introducing the talk itself. But to set the atmosphere again for the centre's exploration of the Heart Sutra and all that's happened here over recent weeks, we'll begin as usual by reciting the Heart Sutra together, and then after that, a very brief pause, and Akasharaja is going to chant it in Sanskrit for us. Yes. Sounds like I don't really have to do anything else for the evening. Thank you. Good, so lots to look forward to. So I think the text of the Heart Sutra will appear. Yeah, there we are. Okay. And I'll just ring the bell for this to set the scene. The Heart Sutra. The Bodhisattva of compassion,
when he meditated deeply, saw the emptiness of all five skandhas, and sundered the bonds that caused him suffering. Here then, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. Form is only emptiness, emptiness only form. Feeling, thought and choice, consciousness itself, are the same as this. All things are by nature void. They are not born or destroyed, nor are they stained or pure, nor do they wax or wane. So, in emptiness, no form, no feeling, thought or choice, nor is there consciousness, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no colour, sound, smell, taste, touch, or what the mind takes hold of, nor even act of sensing, no ignorance or end of it, nor all that comes of ignorance, no withering, no death, no end of them, nor is there pain or cause of pain, or ceasing pain, or noble path to lead from pain, not even wisdom to attain. Attainment too is emptiness. So know that the Bodhisattva, holding to nothing whatever, but dwelling in prajna wisdom, is freed of delusive hindrance, rid of the fear bred by it, and reaches clearest nirvana. All Buddhas of past and present, Buddhas of future time, using this prajna wisdom, come to full and perfect vision. Hear then the great irony, the radiant peerless mantra, the Prajnaparamita, whose words allay all pain. Hear and believe its truth. Gate, gate, pargate, parasangate, odi swaha. Gate, gate, pargate, parasangate, odi swaha. Namo Bhagavate Arya Prajnaparamita Arya Avalokiteshvaro Bodhisattva Gambiram Prajnaparamita Charyang Charamano Vyavalokyati Sma Panchaskandhas Tangscha Svabhava Shunyan Pasyati Sma Iha Shariputra Rupam Shunyata Shunyataiva Rupam Rupan Napritak Shunyata Shunyataya Napritak Rupam Yad Rupam Sa Shunyata Ya Shunyata Tad Rupam Evam Eva Vedana Sanya Sanskara Vijnanam Iha Shariputra Sarvadharma Shunyata Lakshana Anutpana Aniruddha Ammala Avinmala Anuna Aparipona Tasmat Shariputra Shunyatayam Na Rupam Na Vedana Na Sanya Na Sanskara Na Vijnanam Na Chakshu Shrotra Grana Jiva Kayamanamsi Na Rupa Shabda Gandha Rasa Sprashtavya Dharma Na Chakshu Dhatu Yavanna Mana Vijnana Dhatu Na Avidya Na Avidyakshayo Yavanna Jaramaranam Na Jaramaranakshayo Na Dukkha Samudaya Nirodha Marga Na Jnanam, Na Prapti, Na Aprapti. Tasmat Shariputra Apraptitvat Bodhisattvasya Prajna Paramitam Ashritya Viharati Chitta Varana Nastitvat Atrasto Viparyasa Atikranto Nishta Nirvana Praptaha Shriyadva Vyavastita Sava Buddha Prajna Paramitam Ashritya Anuttaram Samyak Sambodhim Abhisambuddha Tasmat Jnatavyam Prajna Paramita Mahamantro Mahavidya Mantro Nuttara Mantro Sama Mantra Sarva Dukkha Prashamanaha Satyam Amityatvat Prajna Paramitaya Mukto Mantraha Tadyata Gate Parasangate Bodhiswaha Iti Prajna Paramita Hridayam Samaptam.
When Vajrapriya asked me to lead this evening, his vision was that I would lead it just before there was a weekend retreat at Taraloka, which would be next week. Because I was away, I have to move it back to this week, but I still feel and hope that I really am setting the scene for that weekend retreat at a place which is very, very dear to me. So, and what I want to focus on this evening is not the detail of the Heart Sutra, and you've had a lot of discussion and a lot of consideration around the Heart Sutra already, but I want to place it in its tradition of the Mahayana and the Prajnaparamita, both in terms of teaching and ultimately in terms of the figure of Prajnaparamita as well. And also I'm conscious that you're going to Taraloka, where that figure is in the landscape. Yeah. Okay. So the title is The Heart Sutra, Myth, History and Poetry. And the title in Sanskrit, to continue the Sanskrit, is the Prajnaparamita Sutra, the sutra which is the heart of wisdom. So the Heart Sutra, which I'll come on to say more in detail about quite a long way into this, the Heart Sutra is actually the heart of the tradition that I'm going to be talking about, and is seen as the very heart of wisdom. Yeah. And it comes in a slightly longer and a shorter version, and what you chanted was the full version, and you're probably familiar with that already from what you've discussed. But the opening invocation is translated as homage to the perfection of wisdom, the lovely, the holy. So the Heart Sutra is actually dedicated to the perfection of wisdom, vision and tradition, and the heart of it. So I'm speaking about history and myth. So history is about the rise and the fading away of the teacher, and the appearance and the apparent fading away over time of the figure of Prajnaparamita as well. So the history is partly about violence, destruction of the sacred, and it's also about preservation, rediscovery, rescue and reappearance. And there are some particular people I'm going to mention as part of that process. And this is the traditional teacher Nagarjuna, the Buddhist scholar Edward Konser, and also Dharmachari Saga. So I'll begin by saying things about the perfection of wisdom as a deeply significant tradition within the Mahayana. And the development of this thought happened because a good period of time had passed since the direct teaching of the Buddha, the presence of the Buddha. So there was a lot of that immediacy, which is actually something I talked about the last time I was here. And things inevitably over time can become more rigid, more formal, and so on as well. So it needed something else. And also, of course, all of this is about impermanence and change, because that's what life is about, and society changes. So it was a changing world by the time we come 500 years on to the period of the Mahayana, again starting in India. So people could read, so literacy. And that enabled a more subtle understanding of language, a more complex language, and evocative, metaphorical language as well. And the Dharma was communicated very much in terms of sacred texts. So the reading and then the text. So, and also it was more universal, it was to the laity as well as to the monks. And the world had opened up. So there was trade, travel. The Silk Route was open between India and the developed civilization of China. And so these very texts were also translated, written out, carried across Asia. And the teaching of the Prajnaparamita spread, particularly to China, Japan, Tibet, Mongolia, Vietnam and Korea. And it continued to be a strong influence on Zen Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism. So on the shrine, I've placed a Japanese text. This is the beginning of it is the Heart Sutra in Japanese. And I bought this in a temple in Japan, and to go into some quite complex negotiation to be sure I was getting what I wanted. So in my pocket dictionary, I looked up heart in Japanese and then asked the person who was serving me, because it's also a tourist place as well as a temple, didn't know. But because it was Japan, she went off and she asked somebody who did know, and she came back. And then I bought it, and she also did what they did, which she put on her white gloves and she put it on a tray and she passed it over to me. You know, so that's one example of the sort of reverence for the text, although actually they would do that with anything that you were buying from them. And my other pleasure actually in leading silent retreats at Taraloka, there are two Dharmacharis who can chant the Heart Sutra in Japanese, which is faster and quite sort of guttural as well, quite deep. But the texts were placed on shrines. They were reverenced. They were more than just a book. Okay. So you probably know the main teachings of the Mahayana, but I'll just remind you in quite simple terms. And it is a revelation in these new circumstances of what is implicit in the Buddha's teaching. So this is not revolutionary change, it's an unfolding. So the teaching of Shunyata, which you heard you pronouncing recently, which is emptiness, and emptiness of fixity, of fixed entities, of anything being fixed and unchanging. And that applies to everything and everyone, and also means that everything is in a state of flow, of connection, of relationship, and free from the limitations, actually, of false fixity and the negative emotions of craving and dislike that accompany that. And, I mean, emptiness is a particular word, it's a particular translation. Some people like to talk in terms of fullness, because it's also about a richness of experience, of everything flowing, everything in relationship. So it's actually about beauty, respect, response, love, vision. And those true human responses, deeper than craving, deeper than dislike, sensitivity, joy, respect, kindness, empathy, and a true response to suffering. And from that also the Mahayana has given us the figure of the Bodhisattva, the transcendental figure of wisdom and compassion, and in this context, mythically, Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, as well as many other figures. And with the appearance of the Bodhisattva, there also is the arising of the Bodhicitta, so the will to gain full and perfect awakening for the benefit of all beings, which is the most profound human wish and volition. And all of that, in terms of the Mahayana, opened up beauty, the imagination, wonderful visual images, both real and imagined, poetic language, metaphor and symbol, the sound of mantras, all speaking deeply to our being and the deeper realms of the human heart. So the perfection of wisdom began around the beginning of the Common Era, and it lasted for around 1,000 years as a main tradition. Sutras could be incredibly long or as short as a single syllable, which is the letter A, meaning not. Okay, right. And it could be paradoxical, complicated, teasing the mind. They could be deeply profound, breathtaking, world-shaking. And it's the written word speaking to lay and monastic in changing times and speaking to us now. And it's interesting, that link between the written word and speaking, because also the written word does speak to us, but also these texts were recited and chanted in the way that we just have, and expressed through the human voice, and exalted and shared in that kind of way. So that's history. So let's move on to the first part of myth. And it's the mythic account of the arising of the perfection of wisdom. And the belief was that teachings of the Buddha had been lost around emptiness. The Buddha did teach emptiness, and he taught it even, and quite notably, in his early teachings in archaic Buddhism. But also the sense was that maybe later teachings had been lost, or were they preserved somewhere? Could they come back? What had happened to them? And how the myth, the legend developed was that they were preserved, and they were preserved by the Nagas, the dragon kings at the bottom of a great expanse of water. Right? And those Naga kings were visited by the person who would be called Nagarjuna. And there are different versions about what might have happened on that mythic vision, but the one that is often depicted, it's very beautiful, it's that this enchanting Naga princess rises to the surface holding a beautiful book, a sacred text, and the book passes from her hands to Nagarjuna's hands. In a way, it passes actually from the mythic to the historic. And that book, well, who knows, maybe shimmering, luminous, still dry, as if by magic. And it was the perfection of wisdom in 12,000 lines, which is a real text. And it changed his life. Sometimes said that Nagarjuna is the most significant teacher after the Buddha. He taught about shunyata, and he also taught about the middle way. And from this arose the whole unfolding of the Prajnaparamita teaching, which takes us into a different way of being and feeling, and into a deep harmony with the truth. Coming back to the book here again, just to emphasise again, because I went on to this perhaps a bit earlier, the book, a sacred presence in itself. It was, and its words were copied, they were recited, they were illuminated. It was wrapped in silk cloth and placed on a shrine, and the very space around it would be sacred. And that would be true of the Heart Sutra as well. And then it was recited, spoken, heard. And as we have done this evening, it was collective. So in the very act of reciting it, it's not just about you. Yeah. It's just taking us beyond self. So there are two central texts, the Diamond Sutra and the Heart Sutra. And Bhante, speaking about them in his commentary on these texts, which is Wisdom Beyond Words, we may go as far as to say that the Heart Sutra, together with the Diamond Sutra, constitutes the spiritual backbone of the Buddhism of China, Japan, Mongolia, Tibet, Korea, and Vietnam. So I'll just speak very briefly about the Diamond Sutra. It's very complex, it's quite long. It teases the mind away from conventional thinking and easy, logical, factual thinking. But it does end with a very famous verse, a beautiful verse, and a simple flow of familiar images, and this is worth honouring. So this is a different kind of description of shunyata, and it holds the emptiness and the fullness. As stars, a fault of vision as a lamp, a mock show, dewdrops, or a bubble, a dream, a lightning flash or cloud, so should one view what is conditioned. Okay, so our imagery for our fleeting world. It's worth saying that Bhante, Sangharakshita, our teacher, received those teachings in a very different way, because in his teens he went into a bookshop in London, saw a copy of the Diamond Sutra and bought it, went home, read it, and realised that he had always been a Buddhist. So it's a pivotal point in his life, and thus in the history of Triratna and 20th century Western Buddhism. So moving on to the Heart Sutra, it's a written text but also spoken, and it's recited across the Buddhist world often daily, and it's recited more than any other Buddhist text, which is wonderful actually, because it's quite deep and teases the mind as well. It's wonderful to think of it being expressed again and again in that kind of way. And it was often carved on stones that might be by the wayside. And we can know it by heart, which is a great thing to do, and we recite it together again and again. And if we learn it by heart, then in a way it's more deep in our being, and we're not dependent on any external conditions to be able to say it. And it's leading us towards a wisdom beyond words. And it was also contemplated as a meditation practice, as a sadhana practice, and that can still happen. But its origin is a mystery. It's not the words of a specific teacher, it's not written by Nagarjuna, it's not written by Shantideva, it's not written by a known author, a known scholar. We don't know if it came from just one person or from more than one. And how did it arise? Did it arise in deep meditation? Were these words heard in somebody's mind in some way? And did they then flow through the hand that was writing them down for the very first time? And the mystery feels appropriate because it takes it away from the ordinary and the mundane. So there's no specific author, teacher, but is offered as the words of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. So there's a weight to that. And his experience, actually his moment of ultimate insight into emptiness, when he sundered the bonds that cause him suffering. And I'm not going to go into the details about the long version and so on, but you'll know that at the beginning it's spoken to Shariputra, the enlightened disciple of the Buddha, who is silent, who doesn't respond. And so it's a sort of passing on, expansion of the tradition there from the time of the Buddha to the Mahayana. And I quite like it that Shariputra doesn't respond, actually, because it leaves it as a space for us just to receive the direct communication and to listen and to hear. It's verses, it's poetry, it's in a distinct form, it's not full of beautiful natural imagery, has a particular sort of character and tone to it. And at first, all those early verses, like the beat of the bedrock of the communication. Form is only emptiness, emptiness is only form, or no, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. And also, I was thinking when we recited it, but also it can be held with a kind of tenderness as well, and appreciation and softness. But that rhythm and repetition also holds a significant momentum as the experience, the truth is accumulated. And we have repetition of words like form, emptiness, no, so. And that no prefix, as in the Sanskrit, I was thinking it was interesting because in a way it's denying what follows, no colour. Don't think of colour as a fixed thing. And I think the Sanskrit is hyphenated, so it's a little bit more part, the no is a bit more part of the word. But on the other hand, the word colour is there, and because of course there's colour. There's flow of red, there's flow of green, there's flow of blue, but there's no colour as one fixed thing. And the Buddha taught that things can both exist and not exist. And this is the same principle. Okay, there's only that flow. But of course within it, there is something that we can name and relate to. Yeah. And there's a momentum to a developing final vision, to all those final stages of beauty. We get to the point where the Bodhisattva reaches clearest nirvana. And then that expands to all the Buddhas of the past and present who have come to full and perfect vision. So this is the significance of that truth that we have dwelt with earlier, and the richness, the ultimate full transcendence of it. And then we move to the Prajnaparamita mantra, the perfection of wisdom mantra, the mantra of that teaching, which I don't know if you've discussed. We talked about the mantra any of the evenings. Okay, so it's radiant, it's peerless, it's beautiful, and it's a dharani, which is a short mantra which does have a sequence of lines, so it's different from just chanting a bodhisattva's name. And sometimes it's called a spell, although Bhante said he didn't think that was a good word for it because it has other associations, but there is something wonderful or magical or enchanting about it in a very refined way. And we repeat it 3 times, and it's ascending, it ascends through different kinds of emptiness, in that sort of upsurge. But it's also the words that allay all pain. So this is about the end of suffering. This is about compassion, and it's about the tenderness of the heart, and it's about what we most deeply long for. And the culmination of the mantra, the different levels of emptiness, that sort of upsurge, is Bodhi, which is awakening, and then Svaha, which Bhante says is untranslatable, but the best translation of the Sanskrit is all is well, and it's a blessing. All is well in the most ultimate sense of those three words. And, when we finish chanting it, which is very often at the end of the sevenfold puja, it's really good if one can just sit and hold that space. Okay, so taking the perspective of history, the perfection of wisdom tradition declined over the centuries. The best sutras were the early ones, and the Heart Sutra was an early one. So something more was needed to hold its wisdom, its beauty, its dharmic significance. So in the words of our teacher Vasantra, the book becomes a goddess, and that's amazing. So that's a wonderful release into beauty, into colour, into symbolism, and all transcending female presence, the perfect perfection of wisdom, Prajnaparamita. And we're going to just put up one image. Just wait a moment, because I found it quite difficult finding images, actually, because we all imagine, and what we're imagining reaching out towards is a beauty beyond what we know. So this, however, is the one from the cover of Wisdom Beyond Words, Bante's book, and I think it is a beautiful image. It's not the only way you see. No, sorry, this is the last one.
Number 3.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to tell you that. Yeah, there we are. Golden. Okay, so leave it there. I'll tell you when to take it off. And so I'll read an invocation to her, an evocation would be a better way of putting it. And this is from a Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. She is worthy of infinite praise. She is utterly unstained, because nothing in this insubstantial world can possibly stain her. She is an overflowing fountain of incomparable light, and from every conscious being on every plane of being, she removes the faintest trace of illusory darkness. Okay, so just take the photo off now. So I'm just going to describe the figure as she is, so we're not tied to one particular image. So just sit and appreciate this. If you wish, just close your eyes. It's not a very long description. It's not a sort of sadhana description as such. But she's a female figure who gradually appears in the clear blue sky. And you might see her as misty at first, and then becoming clearer. And there's a sense of the colour gold, soft and shimmering. The figure becomes clearer, but still shimmering, insubstantial, translucent, luminous. She sits on a white moon mat on a blue lotus. Her hands meet together in the position of teaching the Dharma, the mudra of teaching. And a lotus stem rises up to each of her shoulders. At the top of each stem, there is a blue lotus in full flower. On each blue lotus is a white moon mat. On each moon mat is a book of the perfection of wisdom, truly in its place as a sacred text. She is mature and so beautiful. She shines with gold, the colour of gold. As we look, we realise that within her body are millions and millions of golden Buddhas. Their light, Their golden light shines through her and beyond her, flowing out to us. Perfect wisdom and perfect compassion. Unbounded love. Prajnaparamita is the mother of all the Buddhas. We gently hear the notes of her mantra mysteriously reverberating. Om Adi Hung Svaha. Om Adi Hung Svaha. And then just very gently let this fade away, or just dwell in the back of your mind. And that mantra is the mantra of the figure, as well as we have the mantra of the teaching. So it's incredible. She's the mother of all the Buddhas. They shine within her. Again, the mind can't grasp it. And the book is further exalted. It's now a transcendental, visionary object held by Prajnaparamita. So she appeared. She was most worshipped in India, but devotion to her also spread, including to Japan, China, Java, and Tibet. And presumably with many beautiful images and icons. So it'd be lovely to stop there, but time passes, things change, and the story continues in a very different way. So the history is, there was the Muslim invasion of India in the 8th century. There was the destruction of the monasteries, the images, and the icons. These are the kind of things which were also destroyed in wartime. The precious, the aesthetic, the beautiful, the sacred. And Nalanda, the great, huge Buddhist university, was destroyed. All those sacred texts. It took 3 months for the books to burn. Just kind of imagine it took 3 months for the books to burn. So one could say all the lost teachings of the Dharma. I'm just going to have a sip of water. Say a little bit more about that. So some were lost, but they existed elsewhere, because this is the time of trade and travel and translations as well. But it's good to honour translators actually as preservers of the Dharma, because they spread it more widely, they take it to different cultures, you know. And when we have fundraising for books to be translated into a different, well, often European language even, it's a very, very important thing to be happening. And historically, I know that in the time of Nalanda and so on, these were patient men working maybe for years and years. A famous example is Huan San, and he was at Nalanda, I think, for 7 years. You know, they're working in a different language and then they do their translation by hand, and they make long, dangerous journeys carrying these words to safety across mountains, across deserts. And Huan San crossed the Gobi Desert, calling on the Heart Sutra as protection. And so, like the Naga kings, actually, the mythic version, but the historical counterpart, you could say, is the translators who preserve the Dharma. So the Dharma disappeared from India, from the birthplace of the Buddha. And not just India, also in a way China. Because China was also invaded, had other invaders who banned other religions. So again, impermanence, nothing is fixed. Part of the theme of the Heart Sutra, that things arise, change, fall away, and are sometimes preserved. So some people hid over 10,000 Buddhist manuscripts and silk paintings in a cave. I'm not sure exactly where, in China or near China, and that included the Diamond Sutra. Locked away, forgotten, someone described it as the hidden library And in 1900 it was discovered, and the Diamond Sutra was in very good condition because of the quality of Chinese paper, even at the time when it was hidden away. I think it was discovered by the British, which is why the Diamond Sutra is in the British Library, and you can go and see it. But Prajnaparamita also disappeared, of course, from India, but she wasn't well enough established in other countries to survive, because actually Tara remained the dominant female bodhisattva, which is wonderful in itself. But for Prajnaparamita, the devotion didn't continue in the same way. So seemingly lost to the world, all that unspeakable beauty, that golden light. And then in Java, in the early 19th century, a beautiful 13th century rupa was discovered, which had been buried for a very long time and was very well preserved, and they didn't know who it was. And it looked, can you put up the first of those pictures, because it looked very much like what you're going to see. Okay, so in a different landscape, okay, and then you can probably go on to the next one now. So these are, okay, so I'll come on to these, but explain the connection between that and the landscape of Taraloka. So the next preserver of the Dharma, we've met Nagarjuna, and now we're going to meet Edward Konser. Half English, half German, a rediscoverer, a translator, a remarkable man. He returned to England from Germany in the 1930s because he was fleeing the dark forces of fascism. And also, he's a very noble man. He married a Jewish woman so that she wasn't sent back to Germany before Hitler came to power. And he also spent 30 years translating the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras into English. Okay, so the work of the translator again. And he travelled very extensively in Buddhist countries, and he was looking for images of Prajnaparamita. And he found in all those journeys only about 40 icons of her. But he has contributed hugely to preserving the Prajnaparamita teachings and to our awareness of Prajnaparamita herself. And she has now appeared in our world. So on the weekend at Taraloka, you'll see there's a large Prajnaparamita rupa in a clearing in the landscape. So this brings me on to Dharmachari Saga. I don't know, do you know him? Yeah. Okay. So a Triratna order member. And I haven't checked his meaning of his name with him, but my understanding of the meaning of his name is Vajra of the ocean. And it's also the name of a Naga king who preserved the Chintamani, the Bodhicitta. So actually this links the historic and the mythic. And he shared his experience around the Taraloka Rupa with Taraloka of the time when there was, not sure how much this happened actually, but there was a plan to write blogs about the Rupas in the landscape. And so Natalia, who was doing this, showed what he wrote to me, because I was interested in Prajnaparamita, and also I was talking to her about the Amitabha Rupa. So the history here is that Sagravajra had never been a sculptor, but he initially made a cast from a replica of that 13th century rupa unearthed, taken from the ground, from the earth in Java. And he created an initial sculpture when living in a basement at Rivendell Retreat Centre. He hadn't ever sculpted before. He's in a way is the artist in this story. He then moved to Gukyaloka, the men's ordination retreat centre in Spain, for a 4.5-year solitary retreat with this figure as his focus. And what he wrote was, Having made the outward form, I wanted to discover her inner character and essence. And it was a strong time for him, and he realised that having created a form, he needed to create a place for her to be. So he took the Rupa with him and went to the Buddhafield Festival, this huge camping event in the summer. And there was a man there who was running a spiritual arts competition with a money prize. So Saga entered, and he didn't win. And the man gave him, anyway, 1.5 acres of land. So one of those really sort of auspicious happenings, actually. And that's enabled him to buy the place where he lives, in Devon, where he's created a forest garden as what he calls a Prajnaparamita sanctuary. And it includes an underground spring, so it's in the spirit of the Naga princess as well. And I think there are quite a lot of rupas that have been created, that have been taken from that form. I think when you look online, there seem to be others, but I know that he's sculpted at least 2 more for our movement, which is this one at Taraloka and more recently the one at Adhisthana as well. And it's very solid. Its form, it's close to the earth. He described it as fecund, and that's a rich experience, as well as the imaginative experience we have of something formless, luminous, very, very subtle. I talked to Karunavapi at Taraloka who fundraised so they could buy the Rupa, and she just said, oh, people just gave. They just gave. And actually her name means Lake of Compassion. So she also has a relevant and auspicious name. And I'm just going to quote his words, Sagovajra's words, as the words of the artist, the sculptor, and the spiritual devotee. And this is helpful, actually, if you're going on the weekend. This is why I'm sharing all of this. So he wrote, there are certain proportions, the placement of ornamentation that brings the figure to life. Working on her down in the basement of Rivendell, some nights it seemed to me that she was breathing. If you look closely, there are descending and ascending strands of jewellery that give this impression. There's a sense that I'm just following a golden thread and seeing where it leads. So do visit her. Maybe make an offering, circumambulate, look down on her from the mound above, walk round the Tara lake, the piece of water which is just beyond the mound, and listen to the whispering tree on the path beside her clearing. Or maybe just hold the sense of Prajnaparamita and her golden wisdom brightly present in our world. So I've only got a few more sentences, but could you just turn off the picture now? So I'm just going to end by gathering all of this together, and this is Bhante and Wisdom Beyond Words, and it's closing words of the chapter about the Heart Sutra. We can continue this tradition in the West not by merely looking at words on a page, but by learning to listen to the voice of Avalokiteshvara in our own hearts and waiting for the flower of perfect wisdom to bloom there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.